Stanford University.
My name is Abbasi Milani. I am the director of the Muqaddam program in Iranian Studies. And as they say in films, I hope this is the beginning of a long friendship. This is really the first time that the Iranian Studies program has done anything with the Abbasi program. And this is possible, this has been made possible because of the infinite generosity of Shahzad Bashir, my very dear friend and colleague. When he became the director of the Islamic Studies program, we had a British conspiracy. We had some conversations about how we should, where there are overlaps, try to work together. And he kindly agreed to begin this process of occasionally working together by giving a talk for us on Persian in Pakistan, many dimensions of a cultural relationship. And as we were sitting there, we were planning our next conference. Hopefully next year we'll announce it. Before turning over the meeting to Professor Bashir, let me make a couple of other announcements about our upcoming events. On March 9th, Tuesday, at 6 o'clock, in the same hall, same room, we're going to have Roger Cohen, the prominent journalist from the New York Times, talk about theocracy's limits, Iran at the precipice of its contradictions. Those of you who have been reading him, he is a very interesting columnist and fairly dedicated and passionate about Iran. We've had him here before, and there were so many people who missed his talk and asked us to bring him back that we really, as they say, he's back by popular demand. On March 16th, we're going to have Hushang Shahabi and talk about the Islamic Republic and religious diversity. He's from Boston University, a very versatile and very interesting scholar who's going to be talking about the diversity of religious experiences in the Islamic Republic. One other announcement, some of you might have seen Mohsen Namju's performance as a part of the Asian Music Festival, Stanford's Asian Music Festival. We are going to have another event by Namju on April 10th, Saturday, April 10th. The purpose of that event is more than anything else fundraising. We're trying to extend Namju's stay here as long as possible, and we have had succeeded in getting a couple of grants approved for that, and this is our way of trying to match some of those monies. I don't think for the Stanford community, Shahzad Bashir needs any introduction. Suffice it to say that if you read his work, if you look at his messianic hopes and mystical visions, what attracts your attention is not just the depth of his erudition, but the diversity of his sources, the diversity of his curiosities, and his ability to easily traverse from the literary to the historical, from the political to the mystical, and from them cohere a kind of a narrative that makes sense out of some of the most enigmatic aspects of Islam and Shi'ism. His work on the Nurbakhshiya, I think, is the standard text on that subject, and it is my very great honor and privilege to have him join us here tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milani. That has to be the nicest introduction anyone has given to me. I think because most of the time when I go and give talks, the people, they respect me and all that, but they don't actually have the depth in the subject matter to actually introduce in this particular way. So I'm really, really very grateful, and I am delighted as well, and also hope very much that this really is the beginning of substantive collaboration between the Muqaddam program and the Abbasi program. And even when I am not the director of the Abbasi program, my own work deals so much more with Iran than any other place, Iran and Central Asia, and with Persianate literature, that I have deep and abiding interest in this. So I'm very grateful to the program and to Dr. Milani for asking me to talk about this topic. Now, I have to begin with the confession that this is not something that I specialize in, Persian in Pakistan. But it is a topic that has always stayed with me because I am by birth Pakistani, and I ended up studying things in Persian. So going back and forth to Pakistan, and the question of what exactly is the relationship, and knowing the deep history of it, basically I couldn't but make some observations regarding what is the situation at the moment. And so when Professor Milani and I were talking about various topics, etc., this came up, and he said that this would make for an interesting talk, which I hadn't thought before, because it was basically a kind of a private matter to me until then. Now, one place where I did encounter some details about this was that I am on the board of an organization called Association for the Study of Persianate Societies, which wants to look at things Persianate, centered in Iran, but looking at Central Asia, India, Turkey, even as far as Bosnia and things like that, wherever Persian literature was produced. And they did their biannual convention in the city of Lahore in 2009. So one of the interesting things there, which was rather depressing, was that the only place for which no paper proposals came was Pakistan. There were proposals from India, most of them from Iran. About 25 people came from Iran. People came from Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Armenia, Georgia, etc., etc., etc. But there were no papers from Pakistan except on art. And those were basically people who were talking about art who couldn't actually read Persian. So it was a little depressing. And what I'm going to try to indicate to this talk is, in some ways, how has that come to be, given where Pakistan is, historically speaking, and the great significance of things Persian to the land on which Pakistan as a state exists today. So I will talk very briefly about historical resonances, and then mostly I want to talk about the contemporary situation. But one has to begin with a history because of just to mark the fact that 150 years ago, Persian was the literary language of all the area that is today Pakistan, right? So in 150 years, we have gone from where anyone who was literate would know Persian to very, very few people knowing Persian today. So this is a massive cultural transformation that has happened in this part of South Asia that has to do with British colonialism, but also having to do with the creation of the state of Pakistan and its various policies. So very briefly, this is the tomb of Ali Hujviri, who's in Lahore, which is known in Lahore as, he's known as Data Ganj Bakhsh. This is a man who wrote the famous book Kashf al-Mahjub. He died in 1077. This is the earliest known Persian treatise on Sufism. And this man, Ali Hujviri, is kind of the patron saint of the city of Lahore. All great businessmen, when they arrive in Lahore, the first thing they do is they make a beeline to this shrine and pray over there. So it's very heavily connected to prosperity. The shrine is heavily funded by the Pakistani state. Also, it has lots of endowments of its own, which the state has appropriated, so hence it utilizes it as well. Now, but here too, the fact of the presence of Ali Hujviri shrine in Lahore marks Lahore as a city with a deep connection to things Persian. In later centuries, after the 10th century, the general description that is given is when Sufis from Iran or Central Asia would arrive in South Asia, the first place they would go to is this shrine. And there are lots and lots of poetry about the shrine written by many, many visiting Sufis, etc. Now, to talk about this, one has to, of course, begin with geography. And so you can see, I actually didn't bring a pointer, but you can see the Pakistan on this map. And as I was saying, Pakistan is very much connected to other places in where Persian has been the predominant language of culture and literature: Iran, Afghanistan, and going up into Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, etc. And now, what happens, the first change that comes with respect to Persian is the creation of essentially modern India through British colonization. From 1757 onwards, the British start to take over certain parts of South Asia, actually initially in parts that are not shown in this map on the east coast, what is now Bangladesh and Calcutta and Bengal, which also had a long and very long tradition of Persian literature. And basically, if you want to do any kind of Indian history before the year 1850 or so, there's no way out of knowing Persian, no matter what part of India that one is working on. But with the coming of the British, once the British Crown takes over in 1857, and actually slightly before that, the one thing that the British do is that they change over the language, official language, to English. Before that, the imperial language for South Asia is Persian. So basically, because of that, anyone who wanted to be part of the bureaucracy in South Asian states, of which there were very many from Mughal times onwards, and actually before that too, but certainly from the 16th century onwards, would have to work with Persian. The changeover into English is very significant, therefore, because it actually decreases the valuable and the value of high literacy in Persian. The British promoted local Indian languages, Urdu and Bengali, etc. In the case of Urdu, the British were the first people to actually write a grammar of Urdu. So although the language has a much longer history, it was essentially, it was not a high literary language until the displacement of Persian in the early to mid 19th century. Now, so there's a process that starts going on, but until the early part of the 20th century, Persian was still very much a presence. Certainly for the generation of my grandparents and my parents, they actually studied Persian in schools, and my father could actually make a pretty good sense of Persian. He was born in 1936, so he basically went to schools in the very end of the British period. But even then, this was a significant enough presence. And my grandfather could recite immense amounts of Hafiz by heart. And he liked to drink a lot. And when he was really after having drank a lot, then he would lecture me occasionally about the fact that what I was studying in school was completely and totally pointless, because unless you were studying Hafiz and Saadi, what was the point of studying? So, I mean, I remember these talks very much because of the way in which they suggest a kind of cultural conditioning, which was a part of it. I mean, and this is not a man who actually read Persian regularly, etc. He worked mostly in English or in Urdu or other languages that we spoke. But there was something about the cultural value of Persian classics that was deeply instilled in him. Now, this kind of presence of Persian starts to actually diminish in the 20th century, but it actually diminishes particularly rapidly after 1947, after the independence of Pakistan and India. Because what happens then is the partition between India and Pakistan. And one subsidiary effect of that partition is that the cultural centers, that were the centers of Persian literature and high Persian investment in Persian literature, get separated. So what I've done on the map here is to show you 4 of these centers. On the very top is Lahore, which is in Pakistan. Then we have Delhi, Lucknow, and in the bottom in South India, Hyderabad. These are major Persianate cities that were imperial cities, and because of that, they had a deep connection to Persian literature and culture. With the partition, Lahore is separated out from all the others, and what starts is the process of the creation of a new state. And particularly in the case of Pakistan, part of the difficulty is that the nation really has to be invented because it's a very new idea as to why this should be a separate country. And part of that idea is that there is going to be an investment in Urdu as the national language. And so in that sense, Urdu is the one that has to be made into the new literary language, the classical literary language. Classical Urdu literature has been around for a while, but because of that, there is a kind of diminishing of the status of Persian in this part of South Asia, I think because of the rise of Urdu. Now, Urdu is spoken only by about 10% of the population of Pakistan as its first language. 90% basically learn it as a second language. Now, one of the biggest points of contention between what is now Pakistan and what is Bangladesh, which was the same country of Pakistan from between 1947 and 1971, was the issue of language. What was going to be the national language of the country? And Urdu was essentially imposed because it was seen and portrayed and basically propagandized as the high literary language of Indian Muslim culture, which again is a very interesting choice, given that if one really wants to go to that, it would have to be Persian and not Urdu. Now, but because, eventually what happens is Bangladesh goes away for many different reasons and becomes a separate country. But part of that has to do with the linguistic politics of the new state. I think so. I'm just trying to suggest that about the significance of change of language. Now, they could have actually chosen Persian then rather than Urdu, for which there was much greater commonality in many ways between Bangladesh and what is now Pakistan, because Bengali history, etc., is also written in Persian until the 19th century. And the ultimate language that matters in the end is actually English, anyway. So Urdu is sort of there, but there is this displacement. Now, I want to show you the relationship between Urdu and Persian and its closeness. So this is the Pakistan's national anthem. That was the way this was made. Was in the country became independent in 1947. The music for the anthem was composed first. And then there was a national competition for writing the actual text of the anthem. In 1950, this was approved, and it was first time it was played was when the Shah of Iran came to visit. Now, the interesting thing about this text is that there's only one word in it, which is marked with the green ka, that makes it into Urdu and not Persian. Now, it's not very good Persian, no question about that, but technically speaking, in terms of actual morphology, Urdu and Persian are that close. But the relationship is hierarchical. That is to say, you don't need to know lots of Urdu to understand Persian, but you do need to know a lot of Persian to understand high classical Urdu or literary Urdu very well. Now, in many ways, this word is inserted specifically, actually, to make this into Urdu, because it could well have been understood as being in Persian. And this, if one is to read this as Persian, this is a particular time. Sorry?
Which word?
It's the one ka.
The second one. That A is also Urdu. In Persian, you would say Khodaye Zul Jalal.
Right. I mean, and orthographically, there are other issues too. Actually, there's.
Sometimes they write it
Yeah.
with the yeah, sometimes they do it that way.
I mean, idiomatically, there is many reasons why this is more Urdu than Persian, the way that things are constructed. But technically, that's the only thing. So if it were Nizam Sarzamin Pak, that would make it Persian. That one sentence, Pak Sarzamin Ka Nizam, is what it means. So here too, you can sort of see the closeness between Persian and Urdu, and the entangledness of the two languages. Of the great poets of classical Urdu poets going to the 19th century, For example, the most famous is Asadullah Khan Ghalib, who wrote in both Urdu and Persian, and he is very famous for his Urdu, not so famous for his Persian, but he himself thought that he should be better known for his Persian than for his Urdu because of the cultural weight attached to the two languages. Urdu was a vernacular, it's Indian, whereas he prided himself for being of Turkish descent and things like that, and Persian was much more important. Now, what we have over the course of the history of Pakistan is then a gradual diminishing of the role of Persian through because of a number of different reasons. Now, it has already begun in, as I said, in the 19th century with the adoption of English, and over the course of the 20th century, and it accelerated by 1947. Now, what really changes in many ways is from the 1970s onwards, where the cultural politics of Pakistan undergo a very significant change. From the 1970s onwards, late 60s, 70s onward, there starts to be very significant labor migration to the Arabian Peninsula, to the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, etc. And the people who are going there, they also then come back and they have cultural influence because they're affluent, etc. And because of that, in part, the Arabic starts to rise. There's a kind of almost in the Pakistani cultural sphere, there's a competition going on between Arabic and Persian. And there is an issue of alignment, which alignment also then aligns to the rivalry between Iran and the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf as well. And those rivalries get played out in Pakistan in many ways in proxies from the 70s onwards. Now, one of the interesting things is that now if you, the past few times I've been to Pakistan, going to even to Chinese restaurants, the music that's playing is Arab, which is very, very peculiar because it's a marker of this kind of cultural change that happens. Also from the 1970s onwards, for various reasons, the public media in Pakistan started pushing Arabic. So there would be daily lessons for anyone who wanted to learn Arabic being given on TV, as compared to this where Persian is actually declining. When I was going to school in the early 1980s, when I first started in 6th grade, we had options. This was an English medium school in which we were taught Urdu, but then there was the option of foreign languages, and the options were Arabic and Persian. But by 1984 or so, Persian had been eliminated. It was the only option was Arabic. And that had partly to do with the Afghan war and the religious policies of General Ziaul Haq, very closely tied to Saudi Arabia and other American allies in the Persian Gulf. So now, in the same time, of course, in 1979, of course, the revolution happens. And that gives a particular inflection to Persian as well, because Persian is very closely tied to things Iranian from a Pakistani perspective. And certainly in the early days, there is some hope on the part of the revolutionaries that the revolution is exportable, and Pakistan is a good place to try to export it to. There's a significant Shi'i population. So there's a lot of propaganda going on, and as a result of that, essentially a kind of proxy war develops over the 1980s and 90s in Pakistan between Sunni and Shi'i factions of various types. That is funded or at least supported culturally by Saudi Arabia on the one side and the government of Iran on the other side. Now, the details of this are actually fairly very difficult to ascertain in terms of records and things like that. But certainly in the popular imagination, the Sunni-Shia divide, from a Pakistani perspective, mapped onto Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that's how it was seen. Now, I've been to Iran only once, and I was amazed by the numbers of Pakistanis in Iran. I was going from here because I was studying, and it took a hell of a time to get a visa to Iran, which was really ironic given that the Iranian entrance section 6 in the Pakistani embassy in Washington, D.C. But it took forever and waiting. Now, but if you're trying to get an Iranian visa from Pakistan, it's not very difficult at all, because there is a tremendous amount of traffic of pilgrims going to various shrines, to Mashhad, to Qom, etc. Now, along with this pilgrim routes, there is also the Iranian government essentially supports the education, if you are a Shi'i, to be educated in cities like Qom and Mashhad. And this is the most numbers of Pakistanis that I came across was actually in Qom. It's the only place other than Pakistan where I've seen the Pakistani rupee being traded as a major currency in the streets. At least that was the case in the mid-90s. I don't know what has happened since then. I think that things have changed quite a bit since then because of the mutual animosity or mutual distrust between the two states. But certainly at that time, there was an immense amount of traffic going on back and forth. Actually, things have changed because when we were doing this conference in Lahore, the hardest thing was to get the visas for the Iranians. I basically had to use a cousin to try to convince the Pakistani authorities to give the visas to the Iranian academics who really had no reason. They were basically coming from universities. And when I talked to the Pakistani visa counselor in Iran, what he said, I was trying to say, how can this be? We have this tremendous cultural relationship. They're coming to the city like Lahore, which has this history, et cetera, et cetera. And what exactly is the threat of professors going? And he basically said, I can't go into details, but there are other issues involved with respect to Iranian visitors to Pakistan. From Iran. Yeah, from the US or Europe, there's no problem at all. It's only if they're coming from Iran because of suspicions attached to different types of activities that are sponsored by but that are perceived to be sponsored by the Islamic Republic. Now, so this is the cultural political background, but part of what happens then through these processes is that Persian becomes localized to Iran as a foreign language. So there is a diminishing of the historical kind of roots of Persian within the land on which Pakistan actually is, right? So there is, in the political process then, actually works in a way to alienate things Persian from the larger Pakistani milieu, and it works very much to confine things Persian and even the language to things Shi'i. Which is a very new development because the majority of Indian states for whom Persian was the language were actually Sunni, obviously, right? And that were in parts of South Asia. So the recent politics does have a lot to do with this. Now, oops, sorry. Now, what's the current situation? Just to give you a sense of what kind of activities does the Islamic Republic sponsor in Pakistan. So this is the breakdown. So there's one embassy in Islamabad. There are 5 consulates in different cities in Pakistan. And there's 7 cultural centers which are very, very active all over the Pakistan, even in not so major cities. There is also an Iran-Pakistan Center for Research on Persian, which was actually set up in 1971. And it was essentially renewed in 1979. Then about a couple of years ago, it went defunct. But now the latest thing I've seen in news is that it is being revived again. And this center published a lot of material, and they also were responsible for generating interest in things Persian and Persian language and literature throughout Pakistan, which they did try to do quite a bit. But the biggest thing that they did, which is truly massive and which I think is not appreciated enough with respect to the study of Persian and Persian heritage, is this thing, das Kitabkhane Ganjbakhsh, which is the library attached to this Iran-Pakistan Center in Islamabad. And what they did in the 1980s and 90s was they would purchase any Persian manuscripts that would come on the market. Now, the reason this is very important is because in 1980s and 90s, of course, the Afghan civil war is going on and the Soviet occupation. So there's immense numbers of private libraries in Afghanistan that get destroyed. And so there's lots and lots of manuscripts coming out of Afghanistan that are being sold in Pakistan. And one of the charges of this institute was to buy these up. So they have an amazingly huge collection of Persian manuscripts. and particularly having to do anything to do with Central Asia. There are many manuscripts that are entirely unique, that are not to be found anywhere else, that are now at this library. And interestingly enough, the people who did this for their purposes and for their way of working, the revolution mattered and didn't matter. There is one particular man by the name of Tasbihi, who was in charge of this library, and he had been appointed to this place in the mid-70s, so before the revolution. He stayed on in his job, and he made it his personal kind of mission in life to try to preserve this material. When I met him a few years ago, he was completely fluent in Urdu and could go back in Urdu between Urdu and Persian. His kids had grown up in Pakistan. Every year he went to Iran once on a bus, which is a very long and torturous trip over mountains and things like that. Really a great character as a person, but partly is his personal passion involved in this. Also, the great Iranian scholar, I forget his first name, but Monzavi actually wrote a catalog of some of these manuscripts. So there is a large catalog of Persian manuscripts in this library, which is about 11 volumes or so. But that is actually a very small portion of what they have, because that was done many, many years ago, and they kept buying it more and more. Now, but the problem with this library, its riches are immense, is their interaction with the rest of the world are determined by the attitudes that flow from the Islamic Republic. So the degree to which they're actually willing to cooperate or not at any given moment varies. So the few times I've been there, Tasbihi is very happy in meeting and all this stuff. The director, who is appointed by the Iranian Foreign Ministry, the moment he finds out that anyone with an American connection is around, he leaves. So one can purchase the books, and as long as one has a personal relationship with Tasbihi, one can actually look at the manuscripts, etc. But they're not part of the international circuit of libraries, which is too bad because of the stature of this library. If it were available fully, it really would be remarkable. And it might actually change, because one of the things that happened in India is that the Iranian government now is sponsoring the microfilming of all Persian manuscript to be found in India in this massive institute that they've set up in New Delhi. So they might do something with respect to this as well, although the relationship with Pakistan is more complicated for obvious reasons. Now, I wanted to show you. I'm glad you asked. That's precisely what I'm going to show you. So I looked at the cultural center in Lahore, which was one of the most active ones. Also, the one in Karachi is very, very active. So on their website, these are the events that they list as to what they actually sponsor. So I broke them down into these three categories, although the religious events and cultural events are obviously intermixed given the perspective of the Islamic Republic. Now, so religious events, they very much portray themselves as the caretakers of Shi'is. And obviously the Iranian state acts like that in other places in the world as well. But in Pakistan, certainly, I think gradually it has come to be a mutually constitutive relationship, that there is much greater connection to Iran among Shi'i groups in Pakistan, partly through the educational processes of various types. They also, on the second level, however, they do have educational activities that are really connected to Persian language and literature. They have sponsored, they will sponsor people to go and do PhDs at Tehran University in Persian. So if one looks at the rosters of Persian departments in Pakistani universities, if you look at, say, 1960s or 70s, most of them have PhDs from either European or Indian universities. By now, most of them have PhDs from Tehran University. So there is a cultural shift that has happened because of that. They provide grants of various types. So as you can see in this list here, now the starting of the Persian department at Lahore Women's University is an entirely new thing. This did not exist. Whereas the Oriental College goes back to 1877. It's a very old institution with long history in Persianate things. But Oriental College essentially has gone to nothing in Pakistan because the Pakistani state system of universities provided very little support to universities and colleges that were doing things like studying Persian. They were much more interested in technology and things like that. And so even if you go to Oriental College now, it's one feels a little bit worried going into the building given the state it is in. But suddenly, in recent years, in the past 10 years or so, they've actually started to reinvent themselves with close connections to the Iranian Cultural Center and the fact that now they have 6 people teaching Persian language and literature there, out of whom 5 have PhDs from Tehran University. That the same type of shift is going on. Now, when we look at the types of things they're doing in earlier periods, they have to do with Indian history, Indian literature, etc. Now, more and more, what they're doing with respect to Persian is research on things Iranian. So the last thing I saw was a book on colloquial Persian in Tehran streets and things like that they're doing. Now, on the one hand, it's actually a very good thing because they're treating, one of the odd things is that the countries in that part of the world don't tend to study each other. They study either Europe or we sit here and study them. So to actually treat Iranian culture and Iranian language seriously is a very good thing. But because of where it is happening, there is a kind of shift that has happened in the sense that Persian has become a really foreign language. It is not connected to the land that one is sitting on. Okay, and then you can also see they do art events of various types. They're part of the art scene, the kind of cultural scene in cities like Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, etc. And they participate in various ways with a kind of religious Shi'i inclination. Now, this hopefully gives you some idea of how things have developed. Now, I wanted to share a couple of things regarding the presence of Iran and things Persian in contemporary popular culture, which again reflects the same themes that I've been talking about, but with some more color to them. So this is a poster from 2007, and it's made by this Shaheed Foundation that is based in Pakistan. The person after whom this is named was a 12-er Shi'i alim who was killed in 1988 during a Sunni Shi'i altercation and has become kind of renowned because of his prominence at the time. He was the head at that time of the main Shi'i political association in Pakistan. Now, the interesting thing here is, of course, the use of the image of Khomeini, and what it says in Urdu on top actually is a statement attributed to Khomeini, where he's saying that I have basically accomplished all that I wish to accomplish in my lifetime, and I'm leaving things in good hands as I pass away. So it's supposedly coming from the end of Khomeini's life. But the way it's placed obviously makes a very interesting kind of statement. It's almost reminiscent of the famous statement attributed to the Prophet at the last Hajj, where he says that I have perfected your religion for you and I'm going. Now, Khomeini does have this kind of a stature among the Shi'i community in Pakistan. And so that also then feeds into the Iranization of Persian and things Persianate in Pakistan. And the posters of Khomeini, etc., they're very, very common all over Pakistan. Now, yeah, I think that, I'm not really sure whether Khomeini said this or not, but that, I mean, the way it's portrayed is irrespective of whether he said it or not, right? Because of the significance, as you mentioned, of how he's to be treated. Now, this is a very ordinary photograph, but I wanted to put it in there because you can see this is a gathering of Shi'i scholars. And part of the thing that is very striking in Pakistani Shi'i circles is the Iranization of dress of Shi'i alims. And that has to do, again, with the educational processes that have come to be and the use of certain types of robes and etc., very much in the image of the fuqaha that are in Iran. Now, this particular photograph comes from a region called Baltistan, which is a very small region in the north of Pakistan. It's strategically very important because it's part of the disputed territory between India and Pakistan. The population there is very small compared to the rest of Pakistan. It's about 1 to 2 million, which in a country of 160 million is pretty small. That would be like, one section of Lahore or something like that. But it's the only administrative division in Pakistan that is majority Shi'i. And because of that, there is a particular connection to Iran. And there, when one goes to the cities there, where you see people walking on the streets, and one can see the kind of echo of Qom very, very clearly. And in those places, I think, directly or indirectly, the presence of the Iranian state actually is really quite palpable because of the networks of scholars and that function in a kind of international scene. And basically, for any Shi'i scholar in Pakistan to really claim that they are important and have status, they would have to have an Iranian connection. At least that's I haven't done a full survey, but that seems to be the case when looking anecdotally at things. Now, okay, so let me pause this for a second. So what I'm going to show you is a noha, a dirge, that is on Zainab, the sister of Imam Hussein. And what you will see here is that he begins with Persian and then he moves on to Urdu. And it's a Persian pronounced in a very particular way, as you will see. But this, again, is a concrete indication of the connection between Shi'ism and Persian. Zainab, Zainab,
می فرماید حسین ای جان برادر امید دل حسین بعد از خدا می سپارم بدو این خانوما این طفلها یار نما یا غم زدا زینبا زینبا
Zainabam, Zainabam, Fahariham Parvaram, Zainabam, Zainabam, Fahariham Parvaram.
जाऊंगा मैं जहाँ जहाँ सहने पड़ेंगे हमें गम.
Zainabam, Zainabam, Fahariham Parvaram, Zainabam, Zainabam, Fahariham Parvaram.
कोई बाकी न रहा बांध ली हमने भी कमर है चमकते हुए नज़र.
Okay, now it goes on to Urdu, as you can see. But here, this is just an indication. This is very common in these types of recitations to use Persian as essentially a kind of sacred language because of the connection between Iran and Shi'ism. Now, the other thing that happened is this actually becomes very communal as well. So the whole business of lamenting Hussein and Ashura and all these, that in South Asia has a particular tinge to it because it happens in the context of a majority that does not actually do it. Right? It's very different from the case of Iran. And it can become highly charged. It has led to tremendous amounts of violence. Actually, I think less than a month ago, about 50 people died in Karachi at a bomb that went off outside an Ashura celebration. So both the performance of this type of religiosity and its reception actually are highly charged matters in Pakistan, all then connected in this particular way. There are also particular groups in Pakistan that actually use Persian as their primary language. There's one particular, they are small groups, but the Hazare of Baluchistan, who use Persian as their primary language, and they are often, or can be treated as traitors, as national traitors, because they are Shi'i, and this kind of connection. The reason this comes to mind is because in 1984, I was actually in Quetta, because my father worked for a bank and he was there and I was in boarding school, but we were visiting over the summer, and suddenly one night the whole city goes ballistic and all you hear is gunfire all over the place. And what turned out was that essentially what was perceived to be a Hazara revolt was put down by the army very, very ruthlessly. And it was seen as being a proxy Iranian thing happening in Pakistan. I mean, obviously, I was young and I have this vivid memories of this because of that. But it was really quite amazing when all night long all one heard was automatic gunfire. And then after that, for many years, there was an absolute curfew in the city of Quetta, in the inner city of Quetta, where there would be these armored vehicles. Army was basically in charge of the whole city inside. And inside the city, the amount of destruction you could see, but basically walls were completely see-through because of bullet holes all over the place. And I'm sure they carried out massacres of the Hazara in the context of. After that, it became really problematic to have the facial features of Hazara. And for some reason, someone thought that I looked like a Hazara, so they told me, okay, don't take this kid out to the city at all because there could be pogroms or something could happen. So these things are intensely charged in the Pakistani context, the Sunni Shia business. Now, after that kind of a charged tale, something less stringent or less lighter, and which is something about this man, Muhammad Iqbal, very famous, and in some ways he is the last of the great Persianate figures from South Asia, because he wrote equally in Urdu and in Persian. Died in 1938. He's regarded as the founding father of Pakistan. Obviously, he had nothing to do with it in many ways because he died in 1938. He might have espoused the idea in some form or the other of the creation of a state like this, but he was certainly not a Pakistani because no Pakistan existed when he died. Now, he, however, has a tremendous status in Pakistan, and so every day on Pakistani national, on the state television, there are quotes from Iqbal that suddenly appear on the screen at various times, and sometimes from his Persian poetry, but more often than from his Urdu poetry. Now, most recently, a Pakistani pop singer has decided to sing one of his Persian compositions. The last picture that they show of Iqbal is a very famous one because he's standing with him is his son, Javeed Iqbal, who later became the Chief Justice of Pakistan. And so so many of the images that are being shown of Iqbal actually are reminiscent very much of the nostalgia about Iqbal, and this is a common aspect of Pakistani identity. So I thought this would be the best thing to end, because here then we have English trumping Persian as the universal language, and there could be nothing better than an English conspiracy to end a talk on things Iranian. So thank you.
Basically, two quick points in the question. First point is when you refer to the Islamic Republic, when you're talking about Pakistan, it also brings up Pakistan itself. It's also Islamic Republic. So that one. The other thing, hearing this, I vowel harmony, the vowel sounds appear a lot of Tajik. The question is actually about Arabic in Pakistan. You said it's taken over or something, and I'm really curious to find out, especially because a lot of it is very religious. I'm really curious to find out what kind of Arabic is that. Is that religious Arabic, Quranic Arabic, modern Arabic? You know what I mean? It's like there are various kinds of Arabics there, and if it's like religious Arabic, it could be explained much easier than if it is modern standard Arabic.
Yeah, I think it's more religious Arabic. I think it varies considerably depending on the part of Pakistan one is in. So I think where there are large numbers of Arabs, then it is, I think, like in the frontier province until recently, etc. Then there might be a different kind of modern standard flavor to it. But for the most part, I would say it is religious Arabic that matters, and it's not taught very well. Pakistani education system across the board is really bad, so they don't teach anything well. Really. But it's more just a question of the kind of the relative balance between Persian and Arabic. Now, on the question of the Islamic Republic, yes, Pakistan has been an Islamic Republic, although the debate in Pakistan has been going on for much longer than it happened in Iran. And what it means is very different than obviously the Iranian case. You're quite right about the pronunciation of Tajik, and even when the Noha singer, he sounds like an Afghan. The Zainab, and certainly, like I'm thinking of people like Joni Bek Muradov and Shebnem Suraya, etc., who do sound much more like this of the Tajik. That's a very good question, actually. And what I think that from I don't know whether there's a recent change or not, but I think in some ways, from a Pakistani perspective, what is happening internally in Iran is irrespective of the cultural prestige of Iran and particularly its connection to Shi'ism, right? I mean. It would not be very hard, I think, or it wouldn't be very surprising to find people who are both equally supportive of those who are against the regime and who are those who are for the regime. And that has to do with the way the foreign place is constructed as a place of authority. I mean, another example of similar things happening in India earlier is that in the early 20th century, there is a big movement to protect the caliphate, which is in support of the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman Sultan. This is happening at the same time when everyone is completely supportive of Ataturk. And this does not appear as a contradiction in the Indian materials, whereas obviously those two are actually opposed to each other. But it's just because that is the place from where authority is coming, or which is the hope. So something similar happens, I think, in the case of Iran. The other issue would be there's a class issue involved, I think. And in that way, I think it might go wrong in the same lines as the class support for various aspects of the support or lack thereof for the Iranian regime within Iran, and that might align similarly with respect to Pakistani. So lower class might be more inclined to support whereas the upper classes would not have much sympathy for it. So,
this maddah, this no head that you
yes.
play, this is a very interesting phenomenon in Iran today. These guys are playing a very important role in Iran today. They're almost supplanting the clergy. Is this always been like that?
No, it has been. It has a much longer history in South Asia because for two reasons. Actually, there in the city of Lucknow already in the late 18th and early 19th century, there's a big rivalry between two authors of these types of dirges, Mir Anis and Mir Dabir. These two are seen as they are two of the biggest names in classical Urdu literature, and their specialty was writing these types of things. Now, because of the popularity of that literature, there is a long development of performance that goes with it as well. So it has a very long history. Now, the other thing that happens in South Asia is that there is no passion play. So there is no taziyah in the Iranian sense, but what you have is basically a majlis in which an orator actually tells the story, blood drop by blood drop, in a particular style of Urdu, etc. And that prose narration is derived from the poetry and feeds back and forth with this type of poetic performance as well. So in that case, I mean, part of it might actually be there might be influence going from South Asia into Iran for this kind of media production, which also would make sense with Bollywood and stuff like that. So.
I just want to make a comment and perhaps follow it up with a question. I'm originally from Pakistan, but I have lived in Iran for quite a while. I just want to talk about poetry. And if you look at all the good poets that we have in India and then when Pakistan was created, they were very good in Persian. Okay? And it's, in order to write good Urdu poetry, very advanced Urdu poetry, you have to be good in Persian literature as well as in Arabic. Okay? If you take a few examples, Ghalib you mentioned already, Allama Iqbal, of course, he wanted to dominate in Persian poetry, but because ordinary people could not understand it, he ended up writing it in Urdu. And as late as Faiz Ahmed Faiz, he only wrote in Urdu, but was very good in Farsi.
Sure.
So the question I have here is, if what you're saying is right, that Persian is declined in Pakistan, then how the future poets are going to come together? Because if you are good in Urdu, yes, you can write Urdu poetry, but I'm willing to argue with anyone that it's not going to be as advanced as Ghalib or even Allama Iqbal or even Faiz Ahmed Faiz.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And actually, I think that people, even all the people you're mentioning, including Faiz, it's inconceivable for him to write that poetry unless he is intimately familiar with Persian. One of his stepmothers was actually an Afghan, so he grew up with Persian at his home as well. I think what has happened is that essentially the aesthetic criteria for poetry are changing. So if you look at very recent Urdu poetry, first of all, it has gone to free verse. That has changed some of the quality of it. Now, furthermore, even in terms of usages and the kind of aesthetic affect of poetry, it has gone away from the Persianate models, and it has what that produces then is that there is a lament about it. So, for example, when I was trying to do research for this, one thing I came across was that there was an interview in the newspaper The Nation with two significant contemporary poets. And during that whole interview, what they're talking about is that the fact that Persian is no longer available means that we cannot write good poetry. So these people are echoing exactly what you were saying with respect to the thing. Now, I think that, if we move away from aesthetic judgment of that nature, I think what it shows, though, is that still there is immense amounts of poetry being written. But essentially there is a new language that is developing that has a more strained relationship with the Persianate background than was the case even up till the 1980s. I mean, even a poet like Perveen Shakir, she can write poetry that is completely and totally Indian, but there are other poems by her that are so thoroughly Persianate, and she died only in 1994 and at a very young age. So even until recently, I think the process is still going on, but there's some, I think the availability and the kind of sense of belonging and ownership of the language has changed a little bit.
So I agree with you on that. I have read Perveen Shakir's when you read Allama Iqbal's Urdu poetry, okay, it is heavily Persianized, okay, and so is Ghalib, and they're difficult,
Yes.
but it's at a much higher standard.
Sure. I mean, if I talk as a historian, I can say, well, things are changing. Talking as a matter of personal taste, I completely agree with you.
About this Hazara, where do they live? Which part of Pakistan? And then the connection between Iran. How is right now this connection?
I'm not entirely sure. The Hazara that I know they're in Balochistan, in the city of Quetta, where there were whole neighborhoods of Quetta that were all Hazara, and they spoke Persian to each other, and then they would speak Urdu, other languages too. So they were culturally marked in a particular way. I think there are some other populations as well. In some ways, it's a similar situation as we have in Afghanistan, where there's little pockets of Hazara there as well. So, I mean, essentially, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is a non-border, and so very similar phenomenon exist on both sides. But I don't know of what is the most recent situation that is going on there. I know the tension between Sunni and Shia is very high in Pakistan right now. Lots of things have happened recently that are very unpleasant.
How that tension look like in everyday life?
In everyday life, that's a good question. What has happened is there is and speaking anecdotally and not so much in terms of any particular research I've done, but there is a much, much higher awareness of sectarian difference. So whether you were Sunni or Shia, it didn't used to matter that much. I mean, people knew that whatever, you were different, but now it's become a highly charged atmosphere. So identities have become much, much more rigid, partly because of the various cycles of violence that have gone on since the 80s and 90s, and now going on for almost 25 to 30 years. And then there are political parties that are attached to the differences. So in the case of the Sunni case, there is this group, it's called Jhangvi, and they're from a particular part of the Punjab province from Jhang, and they are militant Sunnis who will attack Shi'is in various places. There's immense use of arms, and for example, in this area in the north, in Gilgit, where Shi'is are a significant presence, what these Sunni groups did was they basically, and this is a very, very poor area, they showed up there with their big SUVs mounted with machine guns on top. And it led to a bloodbath. This happened first in the late 80s and then again over the various times in the 90s. Various Shi'i scholars have been assassinated, even at places like Islamabad airport. So there is a sense that the Pakistani state colludes to some degree with the suppression of the Shi'is. Now, why does it so? It's a complicated matter, whether it has to do with Iran and geopolitics and the relationship to Iran, or it has to do with the fact that Pakistan is dominated by Sunnis because it's majority Sunni state, etc. There are multiple motives working throughout. And then when it happens in local situations, like in the city of Karachi or Lahore, then it has to do with local politics and ethnicity comes into it. Shi'is are certain ethnicities, Sunnis are others, etc. So.
If I may ask you a question, is somewhat unrelated to the topic of the linguistics and the Persian language that you started the discussion with, but somewhat related to just your last talk about the religion. And that is, what is it special about the texture of Pakistan, which was part of India in the past, religiously, and Islam, which is brand and the exposure of Islam has become so radicalized, comparing to the rest of the Islamic world, and even its homeland in Saudi Arabia, for example, or other Arab nations. So in short, what makes Pakistan culture and environment so open and accessible to radicalism?
Okay, that's a long and complicated question. I will try to be very brief in terms of pointing out some of the reasons for it. First of all, I think that one of the issues is that Pakistan perhaps does not have any more percentage of radicals than any other country. It just happens to be more in the news. So if you go to Pakistan, certainly when I go, I don't run into any radicals. So it is concentrated in certain areas, etc. So partly it's an issue of perception. Now, but there are other issues. One of the issues with Pakistan, where Islam is a constant point of discussion, is that it's a country ostensibly set up for Muslims of South Asia, right? So there is a reasoning. Islam is a problem. Islam is an issue from the beginning of the country, and it's an issue that has never been resolved. Now, if from the get-go it's a country for Muslims, but it turns out there are more Muslims who live in India than in Pakistan. So that produces, well, are they all supposed to come here, or what is supposed to be the identity? Then the breakup with Bangladesh, also majority Muslim. There again, the question is, what exactly is it that unites us as Muslims? So ideologically, the identity of Pakistan, particularly with respect to Islam, has always been highly contentious, and that feeds into this. But I think the biggest issue with respect to radicalism has to do with the Afghan war. And the Soviet invasion of 1979, then you have 10 years of everyone in the world and their cousins pouring in money and arms into the country. I mean, I personally remember seeing in Quetta rocket launchers being sold on the streets. At that time, no one cared, and everyone was all for providing the arms, right? And then once that war ends, then everyone leaves, and basically the country erupts, right? Now, because of the very close relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan culturally, and the fact that the border is not really a border, all of those things that happen in Afghanistan have an automatic influence in everything that goes on in Pakistan. So I would suggest that it has really to do with political developments over the past 30 years or so. I mean, one of my favorite anecdotes for this is at least in one report that I read, the textbooks that the Taliban were using were actually concocted in Nebraska, and by the CIA operatives, etc. When jihad was a very good thing in the 1980s, right? So in some sense, Islam is not a constant. Islam is produced in various historical moments, and there was a particular Islam that was produced in the 1980s on the borderlands between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But once it's produced, it has its own historical trajectory, and it cannot be controlled. And I think we're seeing the long-term effects of all of those processes that went on, which are partly related to the things I was talking about, in the sense that General Ziaul Haq's religious policies were very closely tied to his desire to have legitimacy in the country, and the way he did it was by calling himself the champion of the Afghan jihad. And so in that sense, when the state is pushing certain things and it's going into schools, then it acquires a legitimacy of its own. So I would say it's not so much about Pakistan, but very particular history that has happened in the past 3 decades or so. Sorry, that was a long answer.
My question is if there is any statistics on the percentage of the percentage of the Persian speakers in Pakistan, and also if there are any private Persian schools for Pakistanis and families who would like their children to learn Farsi.
That's a good question. I don't know of any statistics. I think that it would be very, very small, but I don't know directly the statistics. With respect to private, it might be happening privately through families and things like that. But for the most part, in terms of the public sphere, what is visible is really the activity of the Iranian cultural centers, which basically provide instruction in Persian for free. And then some of these other universities and colleges in Pakistan that have suddenly gotten interested in Persian departments like Lahore Women's University and things like that.
This percentage is less than 10% or like?
Yes, less than 1% probably. Very, very small.
I was just wondering, you're talking about Hafiz and Saidi, and now Persianism is so much dominant in Pakistan as it was. Are there Urdu translations of these? Has the culture tried to pass this language down?
That's a very, very good question. Yes, there are some Urdu translations of this material now. But that causes a bit of a problem. I mean, how do you translate a language that is so close? Basically, you move around prepositions and postpositions in various ways, and it produces an interesting kind of thing. Where there is a lot of translation actually into Urdu is Persian historical sources about South Asia, because basically, we have this peculiarity that anything before 1850 is simply not accessible if you have lost the language, and so there's a lot of translation of that, of varying quality, I have to say, but it is for popular consumption. Yes.
You mentioned close cultural links between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Also, there are cultural links between Pakistan and India besides the Islam and the religion that was the main cause of the separation. Do you think on part of the India, could there be a reconciliation or an approachment on the part of the India to Pakistan to get closer to Pakistan, to be able to shield it from the radicalism which is facing up from the side of the Pakistan? That India start on its own the reapproachment to Pakistan to grasp it away from being absorbed by the radicals in Afghanistan?
Yes and no. I think that if there is a rapprochement, it would have to go all the way through Afghanistan, because part of the issue with Pakistan is that both the boundaries to the Indian side and to the Afghan side are highly problematic. They don't really mark anything in terms of cultural difference or other issues, right? So you can't really stop at the Afghan boundary, Afghanistan-Pakistan boundary, in part because the Afghan state doesn't even acknowledge it as a boundary. The Afghanistan has never acknowledged that as the real boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a disputed boundary because it was set up by the British, etc. Now, what you are suggesting actually can happen relatively easily by normalization of borders. Right? If they say, okay, well, these are separate countries. I mean, there are separate countries in Europe that the boundaries don't really matter. People go back and forth, etc. And so, in that sense, that normalization could happen if there is political will on all different sides. I think in Pakistan, one of the issues that is there, which is aside from cultural issues, is an economic issue. If the relationship between India and Pakistan were to become normalized, Pakistan would become the Mexico to United States. It would be completely dominated by Indian capital, Indian industries, and this is why on the Indian side, the greatest interest in normalization is among the industrialists, because it's a huge market. It already is probably the biggest single market for Indian cultural products, because they're all over the place in Pakistan. So that, I think, is what partly drives the difficulty, aside from the rhetoric that goes around about India and Pakistan are in no way possible are they equivalent countries, right? I mean, more than 1 billion people, 160. I mean, India is a completely different scale of a country. And so a lot of the Pakistani anxiety, actually underlying it, is these economic, social kind of concerns that restrict any kind of further development, and the fact that as long as the country exists, it's in the interest of the elites for it to continue existing in this particular way, particularly the Pakistani army, that basically is the only power in the country. And it is in its interest to have the enmity with India so that they can live very, very well, as they have done over the past few decades. So there are other kinds of issues involved as well, I would say.
Well, thank you very, very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.